Can you stay with me tonight? The lonely cowboy to the virgin giant bride. He never ordered. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after noon, crawling across the Montana plains like a lazy caterpillar made of dirt and summer heat. Jake Thornton squinted from the porch of his weathered cabin, one hand shielding his eyes from the relentless August sun of 1887. He'd been expecting supplies from Sioux Falls, coffee, salt, ammunition, not whatever was making that much commotion on the road to his isolated homestead. The wagon that finally pulled up to his fence wasn't the merchant's cart he'd anticipated. It was a passenger coach, dusty and road-worn, with a nervous-looking driver who couldn't seem to meet Jake's eyes as he climbed down from his seat. "You Jake Thornton?" the driver asked, voice cracking slightly. "That's what the deed says." Jake stayed on his porch, boots planted firm. At 32, he'd learned to be cautious about unexpected visitors. Out here, 20 miles from the nearest settlement, surprises were rarely good. "Got a delivery for you." The driver walked to the coach door, hesitated, then opened it with the reluctance of a man releasing something dangerous. What emerged wasn't dangerous. It was something far more confusing. She unfolded from the coach like a carpenter's measuring stick being extended to full length. 6 feet, 2 inches of woman, with shoulders broad enough to carry fence posts and hands that looked like they'd never met a delicate teacup they couldn't crush by accident. Her dress was simple, homespun, travel-stained and dusty, but clean. Her hair, the color of wheat at harvest time, was pulled back in a severe braid that fell past her waist. But it was her face that stopped Jake's breath, strong-jawed, high-cheeked, with eyes the color of a Montana sky before a storm. She was beautiful in the way a mountain was beautiful, impossible to ignore and slightly terrifying. "Mr. Thornton?" Her voice was surprisingly soft, like she'd spent years learning to make herself smaller through sound, if not through stature. "I'm Ingrid Johansson, from the mail-order bride agency in Chicago." Jake's mind went blank as a fresh sheet of paper. "The what?" The driver thrust an envelope at him like it was on fire. "Here's the paperwork, mister. She's paid for, delivered as promised. Not my business beyond that." He was already climbing back onto his seat. "Wait just a damn minute," Jake started. But the wagon was moving, the driver whipping his horses into a trot that became a gallop within seconds, like wolves were chasing him instead of just confusion and awkward silence. Jake looked at the envelope in his hand, then at the woman standing in his yard with a single battered trunk at her feet. She met his gaze steadily, though he could see the slight tremor in her hands as she clasped them in front of her. "There's been a mistake," Jake said finally. "I didn't order. I never contacted any agency." "The letter said you did." Her voice remained soft, but there was an edge to it now. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "3 months ago, they showed me the correspondence. Your name, this address, payment in full." Jake tore open the envelope. Inside was indeed correspondence. Letters written in a handwriting he'd never seen before, signed with his name in a passable forgery. And a receipt. $300 for one mail-order bride, Scandinavian descent, excellent health, age 24, unblemished reputation. His brother Marcus's work. Had to be. Marcus, who'd stopped by 6 months ago, drunk and maudlin, insisting that Jake needed a woman to civilize this God-forsaken patch of dirt. Marcus, who'd left 2 days later with $300 Jake thought was going toward settling Marcus's gambling debts. Jake's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "My brother," he said through gritted teeth. "This has my brother's stink all over it." Ingrid's face didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. A light going out, maybe? "I see. So you don't want a wife." "It's not about wanting—" Jake caught himself, ran a hand through his hair. This wasn't her fault. She'd traveled, what, 1,500 miles? Based on lies and forged letters and his brother's misguided notion of charity. "Miss Johansson, it's fine." She squared her shoulders, which made her look even taller. "I understand. I can work for my passage back. I'm strong. I can help with whatever you need until you can arrange my return to Chicago." Jake looked at her, really looked at her. She stood perfectly still, like a soldier awaiting orders. But he could see the fatigue in the lines around her eyes, the way her dress hung a little too loose on her frame. She'd lost weight during the journey, probably from bad food and worse anxiety. And there was something else in her face, something he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning, the look of someone who'd stopped expecting good things to happen. "How long since you ate?" he asked. The question clearly surprised her. This morning. Some bread and—" "Come inside." Jake picked up her trunk, heavy enough that he grunted lifting it, and carried it toward the cabin. "We'll figure this out after you've had a proper meal." He could feel her hesitation, hear the uncertainty in her footsteps as she followed him. But she followed nonetheless, because what choice did she have? She was 2,000 miles from whatever she left behind, in the middle of nowhere, with a man who didn't want her, but who was, at least, offering her food. Welcome to Montana, Jake thought bitterly. Land of shattered expectations and inconvenient surprises. Jake's cabin was small, but surprisingly clean for a bachelor's dwelling. One main room with a kitchen area, a sleeping loft accessed by a ladder, and a small separate room that had probably been meant as a bedroom, but served as storage. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, a table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves lined with books that looked actually read rather than decorative. Ingrid stood in the doorway, taking it all in with those storm cloud eyes, while Jake set her trunk down with more force than necessary, still angry at Marcus, at the situation, at the universe in general. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. It came out rougher than he meant, and he saw her flinch slightly. He softened his tone. "Please, I'll make something to eat." She sat with the careful precision of someone who'd spent years learning not to bump into things, not to make furniture creak under her weight, not to take up more space than absolutely necessary. Jake recognized that too, the way people who'd been made to feel too large learned to make themselves small. He put coffee on to boil and started slicing bread from the loaf he'd baked 2 days ago. There was butter from the Johnson farm 10 miles east, eggs from his own chickens, and bacon he'd cured last month. Nothing fancy, but substantial. While he cooked, Ingrid spoke. "I should explain about why I answered the advertisement." "You don't owe me explanations." "I think I do. You deserve to know who just invaded your home uninvited." Jake cracked eggs into his cast-iron skillet, listened to them sizzle, didn't turn around. Sometimes people talked more freely when you weren't looking at them. "I'm from Minnesota," Ingrid said. "My family are farmers, Norwegian immigrants. I have 4 sisters, all shorter than me by at least 6 inches, all married by the time they were 20. I'm 24, Mr. Thornton. In my community, that makes me a spinster, an embarrassment." "That's foolish." It's true nonetheless. Her voice remained steady, matter of fact. Men don't want wives who can outwork them in the field. They don't want daughters who might grow up to be freakishly tall, as I heard one man tell my father. They want small, delicate things they can protect and feel masculine around. Jake plated the food, eggs, bacon, bread, and set it in front of her with a cup of coffee so strong it could probably strip paint. She stared at the plate like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "Eat," he said, sitting across from her with his own plate. She did, but carefully, as if too much enthusiasm might reveal something shameful. Jake ate quickly, efficiently, watching her between bites. "So you left," he prompted. "The agency promised a match. A man who'd specifically requested someone tall and strong, someone who valued those qualities." She smiled, but it was the saddest thing Jake had ever seen. "I should have known it was too good to be true. Men who value strength in women don't usually need to order wives from catalogs." My brother thought he was helping. Jake pushed his empty plate away. "Marcus means well, but he's got the sense God gave a fence post. He probably figured any woman was better than none, didn't think about what it meant for you, being sent here under false pretenses. Where is your brother now?" "California, last I heard, chasing gold or cards or whatever catches his attention this month." Jake drained his coffee. "Look, Miss Johansson, Ingrid, please. Ingrid." The name felt foreign in his mouth, too formal for this strange intimacy of shared meals and forced honesty. "I can't send you back to Chicago tonight, obviously. The next supply wagon comes through in 4 days. Until then, you can stay here. You'll take the loft. It's got a decent mattress and privacy. I'll sleep down here." "I can pay for my keep with work." "You can rest. You just traveled halfway across the continent. Nobody's expecting you to start hauling water at dawn." Ingrid's jaw set in a way that told Jake this was an argument he wouldn't win. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Thornton. If I'm staying, even for 4 days, I work. That's non-negotiable." Jake studied her, the proud set of her shoulders, the determined glint in her eye. She might have been sent here like a package, might have been lied to and used as a pawn in his brother's misguided schemes. But she wasn't broken. Not yet. "Fine," he said. "But we start slow. You can help with the chickens tomorrow, maybe the garden. The heavy work waits until you're rested." "Agreed." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over them like dust after a storm. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "I should show you the loft," Jake said, finally standing. "Get you settled before dark." He'd climbed the ladder 1,000 times, but watching Ingrid ascend felt different. She moved with surprising grace for someone her size, each movement economical and sure. The loft was small, just room for a bed, a trunk, a wash basin on a stand, but it had a window that looked west toward the mountains. "It's not much," Jake said, suddenly aware of how humble his home must seem to someone from a city, even a city she'd been eager to leave. "It's clean. It's safe. It's more than I expected 4 hours ago." Ingrid turned to face him, and in the close quarters of the loft he realized just how tall she was. Eye to eye with him, which almost never happened. Most women came up to his shoulder. It was disconcerting, also, strangely, not unpleasant. "Thank you," she said, "for not sending me back immediately, for the food and the kindness. Didn't seem right to punish you for my brother's stupidity. Still, thank you." They stood there, too close in the small space until Jake cleared his throat and stepped back toward the ladder. I'll be downstairs, if you need anything." "Mr. Thornton?" He paused, one foot on the ladder. "The letter, the one the agency showed me, it said you were lonely, that you wanted companionship as much as help with the homestead. Was that part a lie, too?" Jake's hands tightened on the ladder rails. "Good night, Miss Johansson." He descended quickly, not wanting to answer, not wanting to admit that Marcus, for all his meddling foolishness, had been right about that one thing. The loneliness out here could kill you as sure as drought or disease, could hollow you out until you forgot what it felt like to be human instead of just a machine that worked and ate and slept. That night, Jake lay in his bedroll by the dying fire, staring at the ceiling and listening to the small sounds from the loft above. Water being poured for washing, the creak of the bed frame as Ingrid settled in, a small sigh that might have been exhaustion or relief or sorrow. He thought about the question she'd asked, about loneliness. Truth was, he'd been alone since Sarah died 3 years ago. Sarah, who'd been exactly the kind of woman Ingrid described men wanting, small, delicate, proper. Sarah, who'd died of fever 2 months before their wedding, taking with her all of Jake's plans for a future that included anything beyond survival. After Sarah, he'd told himself he preferred solitude, convinced himself that alone was better than risking that kind of pain again. But lying here in the dark, listening to another person breathe in his home for the first time in years, Jake had to admit the truth. He'd been lying to himself almost as much as Marcus had lied to the mail-order bride agency. The question wasn't whether he was lonely. The question was what he was going to do about it. Dawn came early on the Montana plains, announced by roosters and the gradual lightening of the sky from black to navy to pale gold. Jake was already up, had already done his morning routine, splash cold water on his face, start the fire, put coffee on, when he heard movement from the loft. Ingrid climbed down the ladder dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, her hair rebraided with military precision. She looked like she'd barely slept, but her expression was determined. "Morning," Jake said, pouring her coffee without asking. "Sleep all right?" "Well enough." She accepted the cup with both hands, inhaled the steam. "What needs doing first?" "You need to eat first, then we'll see." "I can eat and work simultaneously." Jake suppressed a smile. Stubborn. He liked stubborn, even when it was inconvenient. "Fine. We'll start with the chickens. 20 hens, 2 roosters. They need feeding, eggs need collecting, coop needs cleaning out." "I can do that." "I'm sure you can, but I'll show you where everything is first." They worked in parallel for most of the morning, Jake repairing fence line, while Ingrid handled the chickens with an efficiency that suggested she'd been doing farm work since childhood. She moved through his homestead like she'd been there for months instead of hours, learning the rhythm of the place with impressive speed. By midday, when the sun turned vicious and even the birds sought shade, they retreated to the cabin. Jake made sandwiches while Ingrid pumped water, and they ate in a silence that was gradually becoming less awkward. "You've got a good setup here," Ingrid said finally. "The land's fertile, water's accessible. You could expand significantly if you wanted." "Don't have the hands for it. One man can only do so much." "You could hire help." "Could. Don't like being around people much." Ingrid smiled, just a slight curve of her lips. Hence the appeal of a mail-order bride, someone obligated to stay and work without the messy business of courtship or social niceties. Jake felt heat rise to his face. That wasn't... I didn't... I know. Your brother's plan, not yours. I'm not accusing. She finished her sandwich, wiped her hands on her apron. I'm just observing that it's not an unreasonable idea. Many homesteaders need the labor more than the romance. Is that what you wanted? Labor without romance? The question surprised them both. Ingrid's eyes widened slightly, and Jake immediately regretted his forwardness. But she didn't deflect or change the subject. I wanted to be valued, she said quietly, for what I could do, not despite it. I wanted to wake up in the morning and not feel like an inconvenient accident, a genetic mistake that disappointed everyone around me. If that came with romance, wonderful. If it just came with respect and purpose, that would have been enough. Jake looked at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard work. My fiancée died 3 years ago. Sarah. She was 22. We were going to be married in June, but she got sick in April. Fever took her in a week. I'm sorry. Everyone was sorry. The whole town was sorry. They kept telling me I'd find someone else, that I was young, that time heals. But none of them understood that I didn't want someone else. I wanted Sarah, specifically Sarah. He stood, carried their plates to the wash basin. After she died, I came out here, wanted to be somewhere people couldn't keep offering me sympathy I didn't want and advice I didn't need. And now you have an accidental wife invading your solitude. Not a wife, just a temporary guest. Of course. Ingrid stood as well. What's next on the work schedule? They spent the afternoon in the garden, a quarter-acre plot that Jake had managed to coax into productivity despite the harsh conditions. Ingrid had a natural understanding of plants, could tell by touch and sight what needed water, what needed pruning, what was diseased and needed removing. Your mother taught you? Jake asked, watching her work. My grandmother, she could make anything grow. Used to say plants were easier than people. They told you exactly what they needed if you paid attention, never lied about what hurt them or what made them thrive. Sounds like a wise woman. She was. Still is, I suppose, though I haven't seen her since I left for Chicago. Ingrid sat back on her heels, pushed a loose strand of hair from her face. She tried to talk me out of going, said running away never solved anything, that you just carried your problems with you to new places. Was she right? I don't know yet. Ask me in a few months when I'm back in Minnesota. Probably with the same life I left, but now with the added shame of having failed at even this. Jake pulled a weed with more force than necessary. You didn't fail. You were lied to. That's not the same thing. The result is the same, though, isn't it? I'll go back unmarried, unsuccessful, still too tall and too strong and too much for anyone to want. The bitterness in her voice cut through Jake's defenses like a well-sharpened knife. He understood it too well. That sense of being fundamentally wrong for the world you'd been born into, of taking up space you hadn't earned and didn't deserve. Before he could stop himself, before his better judgment could intervene, Jake said, "You could stay." Ingrid's hand stilled in the dirt. What? You could stay, not as a mail-order bride, not as my wife, but as a partner. Help me work this place, split the proceeds, build something real instead of going back to people who don't appreciate you. You don't even know me. I know you work hard. I know you're honest and capable. I know you're here because you wanted something better, and going back means giving up on that. Those seem like enough reasons to offer you a choice." Ingrid stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands and skirt. Her face was unreadable, that storm cloud gaze fixed on something distant. "Mr. Thornton, Jake, if we're going to be partners, you should call me Jake." Jake. She tested the name, seemed to find it acceptable. "This is very generous, but I can't accept charity disguised as partnership." "It's not charity. I need help. You need a place. That's business, not charity." "And when winter comes and we're snowed in together, two unmarried people living under one roof, what will that do to your reputation, let alone mine?" Jake hadn't thought that far ahead, was operating on impulse rather than planning. But now that she mentioned it, she was right. Small communities had long memories and sharp tongues. And even out here, miles from anyone, word would spread eventually. Unless "We could make it official," Jake heard himself say. "A real marriage, legal and proper. But in name only. You'd have your own space, your own life. Just a legal arrangement to protect both of us from gossip." "You're proposing?" "I'm offering a solution to a practical problem." Ingrid laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "Do you know how many times I imagined a marriage proposal? How many times I pictured a man asking me to be his wife, and in not one of those daydreams did he offer it as a solution to a practical problem." Jake felt shame curl hot in his stomach. She was right to mock him. This wasn't how proposals worked, wasn't how you asked someone to tie their life to yours. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "No, stop." Ingrid held up a hand. "I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at myself, at the absurdity of the situation. Here I am, standing in a garden in Montana, having my first and likely only marriage proposal from a man who's making it clear he doesn't want me for anything except labor and legal protection. It's not that I don't—" Jake stumbled over words, trying to find ones that fit the complicated truth. "I think you're remarkable, Ingrid. I've thought so since yesterday when you climbed out of that wagon and stood there like you were ready to take on the world, despite how much the world's hurt you. But I'm not good at this. I don't know how to do courtship or romance. I just know how to work and survive and occasionally make terrible, impulsive decisions." "Like proposing to a woman you've known for less than 2 days." "Exactly like that." They stood facing each other across rows of young vegetables, both filthy from honest work, both breathing hard from emotion rather than exertion. The sun was beginning its descent toward evening, gilding everything in a soft gold light that made the moment feel suspended, unreal. "Can I think about it?" Ingrid asked finally. "I know the supply wagon comes in 3 days, so I need to decide before then. But can I have those 3 days to consider?" "Of course. Take as long as you need." "Thank you." She turned back to the garden, but her hand stayed still, not reaching for the next task. "Jake, this thing you said about Sarah, about wanting her specifically, not just anyone. Does that mean you couldn't ever want someone else? Not for romance, I mean, but for companionship? For someone to talk to in the evenings and share meals with and know you're not completely alone in the world?" Jake's throat felt tight. "I don't know. Hasn't come up before now. But it could. Theoretically?" "Theoretically?" Jake echoed, not trusting himself to say more. Ingrid nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Then she went back to weeding, and Jake went back to his own work, and they didn't speak of it again that day. But that night, as Jake lay in his bedroll listening to the sounds from the loft above, he found himself wondering what he'd just set in motion, and whether, for the first time since Sarah's death, he might want something more than just survival. 3 days passed in a blur of work and careful conversations, of learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. Ingrid proved herself invaluable. She could chop wood, mend fences, help with the horses Jake kept in the small barn. She was strong, yes, but also smart and resourceful, solving problems with a practical creativity that Jake found himself appreciating more with each passing hour. They didn't speak again about Jake's impulsive proposal, but it hung between them like morning mist, present even when invisible. On the third night, after they'd finished supper and cleaned up, Jake found himself unable to settle. He kept glancing at the loft, wondering if Ingrid was awake, if she was thinking about tomorrow when the supply wagon would come and she'd have to choose, go back to Chicago or stay here with a man who'd offered her everything except what she probably wanted most. Finally, unable to stand the silence and the not knowing, Jake climbed the ladder to the loft. Ingrid was sitting on the bed, still dressed, looking out the small window at the stars. She turned when she heard him, but didn't seem surprised by the intrusion. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Need to know what you decided. Before tomorrow comes and we're both stumbling around trying to pretend we're not panicking." "Direct. I appreciate that." Ingrid shifted, making room on the bed in an invitation for him to sit. Jake hesitated, then accepted, settling onto the edge with careful distance between them. "I talked to your grandmother," she said. "In my head, I mean. Asked her what she'd think about all this, and I could hear her voice as clear as if she was standing here. Are you running away again, or are you running toward something?" "And what's your answer?" "I don't know yet. Both, maybe. Neither." She turned to face him fully, and in the dimness he could just make out her features, the strong lines of her face, the uncertainty in her eyes. "I know that going back means admitting defeat. I know that staying means risking my heart on a man who's been very clear he's not offering it in return. And I know that at 24 years old, I'm tired of being afraid of my own life." "I've been afraid for 3 years," Jake admitted. "Afraid that if I let anyone close, I'll lose them, like I lost Sarah. Afraid that the universe has a quota on happiness, and I used mine up already. Afraid that I'm too broken to be anything except alone." "Are you?" Ingrid's voice was soft. "Too broken?" "Probably, but maybe you are too. Maybe we could be broken together instead of broken alone." Ingrid laughed quietly. "That might be the saddest thing anyone's ever said to me, and also the most honest." They sat in silence, close enough that Jake could feel the warmth radiating from her, could smell the soap she'd used to wash her hair. It occurred to him that this was the closest he'd been to a woman since Sarah, and it didn't hurt the way he'd expected it to. "Can I ask you something?" Ingrid said. "Something that might be inappropriate, but I need to know if I'm considering this." "All right. If I stay, if we do this marriage in name-only arrangement, would there ever be a possibility of it becoming more? Or are you offering me a permanent state of being legally bound to someone who'll never want me as anything except hired help with a ring?" Jake's breath caught. It was the question he'd been avoiding asking himself, the one he'd buried under practical concerns and emotional cautiousness. But she deserved an answer, a real one, not a deflection. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I can't promise you romance or passion or any of the things you probably dreamed about back in Minnesota, but I can tell you that in 3 days you've made this place feel less like a prison and more like a home, that I look forward to meals now instead of eating just to stay alive. That last night, I caught myself laughing at something you said, and I realized it was the first time I'd laughed in 3 years. "That's not nothing," Ingrid whispered. "No, it's not nothing. But I don't know if it's enough." "Enough for what?" "For you. You deserve someone who's not half dead inside, someone who can give you everything, not just scraps of whatever survived Sarah's death." Ingrid reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. Her hand was large and calloused and warm. "Jake," she said, "I'm 24, 6 feet tall, and until 3 days ago, the only man who'd ever shown interest in me turned out to be a forged letter from your drunk brother. I'm not exactly drowning in better options, so maybe you're not enough, by some objective measure, but you're here, and you're honest. And you see me as a person instead of an inconvenient mistake of genetics. That feels like more than I've ever had before." Jake turned his hand over, let their palms meet, and fingers intertwine. Her hand dwarfed most women's, but it fit his perfectly, strong and sure and real. "Can you stay with me tonight?" The words escaped before Jake could stop them, and he felt panic flutter in his chest. I mean just stay, here in the loft. So I'm not alone with my thoughts. We don't have to. I'm not asking for—" "I understand." Ingrid squeezed his hand. "Yes, I can stay with you." So Jake stayed in the loft that night, lying beside Ingrid on top of the covers, both fully dressed, hands linked between them like a bridge across dark water. They didn't sleep much, spent hours talking in whispers about everything and nothing. Ingrid told him about Minnesota winters and Norwegian folk tales her grandmother used to tell. Jake told her about Sarah, finally able to speak her name without feeling like he was swallowing glass. They talked about the homestead's potential, about the books on Jake's shelves, about whether the chickens were conspiring against humanity. As dawn began painting the window pink and gold, Jake turned his head to look at Ingrid's profile. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as an employee or a legal convenience, as my wife, real and proper, starting from wherever we are and seeing if we can build toward something more." Ingrid turned to meet his gaze. "No running away?" "No running away. Not you, not me. We stay, and we try and we figure it out together. Even though we barely know each other? We'll learn. We've got time." Ingrid smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "All right, then. Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you, Jake Thornton, and we'll see what broken people can build together." The supply wagon came that afternoon, and instead of arranging passage back to Chicago, Jake asked the driver to carry a message to the preacher in town. There would be a wedding in 2 weeks, and the homestead could use some witnesses if anyone cared to make the trip. Word spread faster than prairie fire. Apparently, the lonely Jake Thornton taking a wife, a mail-order bride no less, and a giant one at that, was the most interesting news to hit the territory in months. On the wedding day, 20 people showed up, more than Jake had seen in his yard since he'd built the cabin. They married under an open sky, with wild flowers Ingrid had woven into a crown for her unbound hair. She wore a new dress, simple but clean, made by the preacher's wife, and Jake wore his best shirt and actually shaved for the occasion. When the preacher asked if he took this woman as his lawful wedded wife, Jake said, "I do," and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. When he kissed his new wife for the first time, brief and chaste as befitted a public ceremony, Jake felt something shift inside his chest. Not healing, exactly. Grief didn't work that way, but maybe the beginning of learning to live alongside the scars instead of just bleeding from them. The years that followed weren't easy. The land was unforgiving, the weather unpredictable, and they were two wounded people learning to build a life from scratch. But slowly, incrementally, things grew. The homestead expanded. With Ingrid's help, they doubled their planting area, added more chickens, bought 2 dairy cows. She proved to have a gift for animal husbandry that Jake lacked, could gentle a nervous horse or increase egg production through some instinct he couldn't begin to understand. Their marriage expanded too, growing from awkward politeness to comfortable partnership to something Jake hesitated to name because naming it might break the fragile magic. They still slept separately at first, Jake in the loft, Ingrid in the newly converted storage room. But gradually that distance closed. A hand held during difficult moments, a kiss goodnight that lingered longer each week. Finally, 6 months after the wedding, Jake climbed down from the loft in the middle of the night and knocked softly on Ingrid's door. "Can I stay with you tonight?" he asked, echoing those first words in the loft. "Always," she answered. 18 months after Ingrid's arrival, she told Jake she was pregnant. He cried, the first tears he'd shed since Sarah's death, and Ingrid held him while he shook with fear and joy and the terrible vulnerability of hoping for something good. Their daughter was born in early spring, with help from the preacher's wife and 2 other women from town. They named her Sarah Ingrid Thornton, honoring both the past and the present. She was impossibly small and perfect, with her mother's storm cloud eyes and her father's dark hair. "She's beautiful," Ingrid whispered, exhausted and radiant. "Like her mother," Jake said, and meant it. More children followed, 2 sons and another daughter, each healthy and loved and growing up knowing that strength was something to be celebrated, not hidden. Ingrid taught them all to work the land with skill and respect. Jake taught them to read and think and question. Together, they built not just a homestead, but a home, filled with noise and laughter, and the kind of messy love that could never fit neatly on a mail-order bride contract. Years later, when Jake was gray-haired and Ingrid's hands were gnarled with arthritis but still strong, they would sit on their porch and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Visitors would sometimes ask how they'd met, expecting a romantic story. "I ordered her from a catalog," Jake would say with a straight face. "Best impulsive decision my idiot brother ever made on my behalf." "He didn't order me," Ingrid would correct, swatting his arm. "He forged the paperwork. I showed up unexpected and inconvenient." "Most inconvenient thing that ever happened to me," Jake would agree. "Turned my whole life upside down." "Good," Ingrid would say, leaning against his shoulder. "You needed upside down." And Jake would kiss her temple, this woman who'd arrived as a mistake and stayed as a miracle, and silently thank Marcus's drunken meddling for sending him exactly what he'd needed when he was too broken to know he needed it. Sometimes the best things in life arrived unexpected, unbidden, and impossibly tall. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was ask someone to stay with you in the darkness and trust that morning would eventually come. Sometimes broken people given time and patience and honest work, could build something beautiful together. And sometimes a lonely cowboy and a giant bride nobody wanted could find in each other exactly what they'd been searching for all along. Someone who saw past the scars to the person still hoping underneath. Someone worth staying for. Someone worth building a life with, one imperfect, beautiful day at a time.